I promised everyone that if and when Long Night gets canceled, I will explain the leak I heard about what is horrifically wrong with it beyond what we assumed was wrong with it, which is that the way they shoehorned black people into it is cartoonishly racist. And like a month ago, I tried to set this up because it's so shocking, it's so stupid, and I don't have hard proof. I didn't think people would believe me. And I wanted to make sure that, like, the makers of The Long Night weren't in a position to yell at me that, no, when your show is canceled, I will tell the world so we don't mourn your loss. Because what could happen to me at this point? It's an idea they passed on. So I had this really long video where I tried to do it the right way. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to upset everyone, but I hope you understand once I explain that I tried to give hints to point you in the right direction, even coming out and saying, well, I just kept calling it the thing that's wrong with it. Coming out and saying it's to do with race was big, but I teased it out too much, so I took that video down. You can't see it anymore. That in that video, for those of you who've seen it, I said, well, they're playing black humans. They're not playing a non-human race like the White Walkers under prosthetics, because that wouldn't count as diversity. So now that a few hours ago, less than a day, they've officially announced that Long Night Prequel is canceled, or at least this version of it. I mean, like 10 years from now, if someone decides to make like an animated anthology of stories from the Age of Heroes, I might even get behind that as like an adaptation of parts of the world book, but not this. This was trying to imitate Game of Thrones. So the problem is they jumped into spur of the moment, just casually, oh, let's get something based on hype without thinking out obvious problems with the setting. They did this based on the pitch and not like, how would we have racial diversity in Bronze Age Westeros, which is like Celtic Druid Britain? There wouldn't be black people there. So the way they shoehorned them in is really racist. So I was told this by someone with access to series Bibles for the other prequels, and they told me it verbally. They didn't give me solid information, but they told me other leaks that turned out to be true. And I told them I hate the very idea of a Long Night Prequel. It's so problematic. So they had no reason to lie to convince me this is a terrible idea. I do want to stress, just be honest with you, my source may have been mistaken or misled based on the telephone game of rumors. It might have just been, or it could have been an early idea they had that they later dropped, particularly because I was told this in mid-2018, and that was over a year ago. It was almost a year before they even filmed it. Much could have changed during that time period. But at least in the early stages, July 2018, I was told by what I considered a reliable source who told me other things that turned out to be true, and I was just so stunned, I said, I can't say this in public with no evidence. Though there are some clues that are mounting up as casting news came out. So with all that build-up, here is what I was told was wrong with how they shoehorned black people into it. It's cartoonishly racist that 2 points. Point 1, their retroactive fix for racial diversity only after picking Long Night and then realizing, wait a minute, we picked it without bothering to realize it's too late to pick one that has racial diversity in it. Their fix for blindly jumping into this to get racial diversity into it was to cast only black people to play Children of the Forest. They were not traveling to other continents. So many people said, wow, there's black people in it. We must be seeing other continents. Even if they weren't Children of the Forest, maybe they were slaves. Maybe they were merchants. And people took that as because remember, this is before season 8, when everyone was still living in the hype bubble that Benioff and Weiss can do no wrong, even after season 5 and everything. But a lot of people just, the news sites that were in bed with them, that were wanting to get exclusive interviews, that wanted to believe in them, said, we'll assuredly see the Giscari Empire, the Rhoynar, Yi Ti, which is their version of China, and Sothorios, and the Summer Isles. Maybe they were slaves, maybe there's something. There was no proof of that other than casting. Well, no. The entire story was set in Westeros itself. All that other stuff, those are pipe dreams people were trying to sell you, because they didn't know better. They didn't want to know better. The fix for racial diversity in Long Night Prequel was to cast only black people to play Children of the Forest. And on a certain level, you can see how that's something they could fall into. Like, I would almost defend something like Lord of the Rings, where this is due to limits of the source material of Lord of the Rings, that they tried to cast non-white people as stuntmen or under prosthetics. But that's because that's what the book is. Even then, as people pointed out to me, why didn't you just have Summer Islander merchant ships visiting prehistoric Westeros, which the World Book says they did? They said Summer Islanders have been visiting our coasts since the Long Night. But I guess they wanted to keep the narrative focused or something. It's that stupid of a thing that this is a solution to a problem that didn't exist. I think the problem is they must have explained, like, well, these are the factions in Westeros, the continent itself, and, well, who is in Westeros? Not the Summer Islanders, they're from the Summer Isles, and they went with Children of the Forest. But you can almost see that happening, or at least this is in the realm of what we've come to expect from studios that aren't as invested in racial diversity or as a big element of, as an afterthought, oh, let's put them as those guys who appear under prosthetics and stuff. The truly insane thing is point 2, which is jaw-dropping. Obviously, and I pointed this out to my source, well, if you're casting black people as Children of the Forest, we already saw those in Game of Thrones itself in Season 6. They're wearing heavy prosthetic makeup. They're these green guys. They're elves. They're not human. And, I mean, in the books, they look even more non-human. The non-human posture, they're smaller. They have, like, cat eyes and claws instead of fingernails. They look like humanoid squirrels almost. They're these elf guys, the Children of the Forest. They don't look human. And they're under heavy prosthetics. Even the actress who played the main child of the forest in Season 6, Leaf, that was played by an ethnically Japanese woman. You know, she's under so much prosthetics, it doesn't really matter. So I said to myself, you know, it's not real representation or diversity. They're these green guys with prosthetics. And they told me, given that they're under prosthetics, the solution they came up with was a retcon that the Children of the Forest at this time are humans. They look human, they are human. Specifically, they looked like black humans. This ethnic group of black humans who were the indigenous inhabitants of Westeros, which in and of itself is typecasting. And then I point out, well, the show already established that they're elf guys by thousands of years later, when Bran meets them. And, well, to explain this discrepancy, they would later show that all the black humans had a magical curse that turned them all into monster gremlin elf guys. So those are the two things that, oh no, we picked a prequel that doesn't have black people in it. Just cast them as the indigenous Children of the Forest, but they're elf guys. Say there was a magical curse that turned them into elves. I almost didn't believe this, but this is a source who is showing me a series Bible for one of the other prequels. And they told me other things on the show that turned out to be true. So I couldn't believe this. I had no firm proof of it, so I didn't immediately tell the world last July 2018 that I had nothing to go on. I hoped it wasn't true. I hoped it was just a stupid early idea they were going to abandon. And the other thing they told me was that it was going to be a very simplistic, like insultingly patronizing in terms of the racial story it was telling. That it even said in their press release now that, it was going to deal with matters of race. They kept describing it to me as a patronizing Thanksgiving story. That rather than a complex, multifaceted thing like the Valyria prequel wants to do, they said it's Thanksgiving. That there's these indigenous people who are black humans uniting with essentially the white colonizers of their continent, the Starks and Lannisters, to fight off a common enemy. Only for the black people to then be magically cursed at the end because it's more important to explain a retcon. I am not making this up. I was told this. I don't have solid proof that this is true. But assuming it sounds like something they would do, like Richard Plepler greenlit this, the same guy who greenlit Confederate. So just the magical curse. I don't think they even thought through the full implications of that. As my follower Tana, who is from Germany, put it, this sounds like something out of Mein Kampf. Like old school race theory of why do black people look different from our Aryan race? They must have been cursed. Or my follower Heather from Quebec pointed out, quote, it's like, did they realize this sounds like they're copying the story of the biblical curse of Ham used to justify slavery? In my high school, we had to read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and he mentions, well, preachers would quote the biblical curse of Ham at us, that Ham was one of Noah's sons who was cursed, so he became black, and his children are slaves or something. I don't know. But black people know of that because that was a big part of slavery justifications in the antebellum period. That, do you understand that, like, saying other races are cursed sounds like the curse of Ham or Mein Kampf stuff or whatever? And I don't think they did it on purpose. I'd actually be less insulted if it's just how short-sighted they were. And the other thing is, this sounds plausible. Weird as that sounds, that as a series of short-sighted decisions, you can see them stumbling into this. Let's go with Long Night because White Walker hype. Then only belatedly realizing, wait a minute, how do we put black people in? Step one, make them children of the forest. Then months later, wait a minute, they don't look like they would in the main show. Well, I don't know, say there was a curse. That whole, I call it downstream thinking of, once we did X, what choice did we have but to do Y? And they do that all the time in the show. You've heard that. Once we chose to marry Sansa off to a rapist, what choice did we have but for him to rape her? That, well, once we chose to make black people children of the forest, what choice did we have but to magically curse them into being elves? And the Quislings and collaborators at Entertainment Weekly and Watchers on the Wall, James Hibbert, Sue Miller, Oz, Luca Nieto, the people at Watchers on the Wall and Entertainment Weekly, I want you to think back to and remember every time in the past 2 years you've heard them praising this show for no reason. Probably because they were happy that it wasn't based on any more books and they wouldn't have to deal with book fandom anymore. Not just that, but not just praising it, but praising it for having great diversity explicitly. Like Sansa Stark in their podcast going, this will have such great diversity. Because they cast black actors. But cast them as what? Cast them as what? Even if this is wrong, which I'm pretty sure it's not, you don't know anything about it. Was TV Dorn a paragon of representation? I remember liking it when we got the casting reports of that the summer before it came out. TV Dorn looked good on paper in terms of the races of the actors. All you knew about this is they cast some black actors. But the clues were starting to line up, though, in the past year. That, look at all the casting reports. I've covered this in other videos. They only cast white people and black people, not just in the announced roles, but in the casting sheets that specifically call for Caucasian or black, nothing else. There were no casting sheets for Latino, Arabic, Mediterranean-looking actors, which is what you would describe Dornish people as looking like. So why did so many people, like Watchers on the Wall, would be telling other people in convention panels, we're going to see the Rhoynar, who are the ancestors of the Dornishmen living in the Eastern Continent? What are you basing that on? They haven't cast or called for anyone who matches that physical description. Or so many people build up the idea that because there was a chapter on Yi Ti is their fantasy version of China in the Far East, east of Karth, And because there is some material on the Long Night, when you're really grasping at straws for what was going on in the Long Night, there's some material about what Yi-Ti was doing in the Long Night, which really wouldn't intersect with this story about the Bloodstone Emperor and stuff. And just through word of mouth, remember all the blind hype and then encouraging fan theories throughout 2018 when we had no new material, to the point people built up Season 8 to be better than it was. Oh, there's going to be a time-traveling Bran being the Night King and stuff. Theories better than what they could ever produce. They did the same thing during all that hype, and in tandem with it, for the Long Night prequel's going to have Yi-Ti in it, China, and even now, as late as 2 months ago, in their Con of Thrones event right after the finale, saying we will definitely see Yi-Ti in it, when the casting phase is over and they didn't cast a single Asian actor in it. Like, the facts are there. They haven't announced or in casting sheets asked for a single Asian actor. Why do you think Yi-Ti is in this? So there's no Asian people. There's no Latino, Arabic, Mediterranean people who could be playing Dothraki or Rhoynar. There's just white people and black people. And even then, a lot of people thought, well, I guess they're Summer Islanders. They should have been Summer Islanders. Which brings me to point 2. First off, the castings were lining up with that, and also notice that the black people they cast all tended to look very tall and thin, elf-like. They didn't cast any strong, masculine black men who, like the way you would have a black character in other shows. They were all very thin-looking, though that might just be a coincidence. That isn't proof of anything. It's at the back of my mind, but forget about that. That isn't proof of anything. Just they're casting white people and black people, and it was starting to terrify me that this is lining up with these rumors, leaks I was told but didn't believe from a reliable source. That's point 1. The casting was lining up. And related to that, point 2, guys, did you ever stop to ask, who are playing the Children of the Forest? Because you would expect the Long Night to have them feature very prominently. And on top of that, we saw in the set reports, we couldn't see inside of the filming locations in Belfast, but there were a lot of caves and a lot of weirwood trees, that places where you would expect the Children of the Forest to live. That increasingly seemed like, and there was this location called Enclave, which I'm pretty sure is a enclave of Children of the Forest, though I can't confirm that. But just, you would expect them to be very prominent in this. So who is playing them? Because, again, if any of these news sites that were blindly praising them had bothered to... People who were blindly praising them after TV Dorn, after the Sansa rape, after they massacred Stannis, after the Arya chase, after dragons zipping back and forth to the wall, who still hyped up, oh, this is going to be great, because they didn't bother to analyze anything. That, wait a minute, just looking at a sheet of their casting decisions, of the casting sheets, why does every one of these specify the actor's race? Because if the Children of the Forest are being depicted as they were in Season 6, under prosthetics as in Game of Thrones, we would have seen casting sheets that didn't specify the actors' races. There wasn't a single one like that. Every casting sheet specified the race. So either the Children of the Forest aren't in it, which is unlikely, or are being played by stuntmen, which also unlikely. They're major roles in this time period. Of the batch of actors who were cast, did you ever stop to ask, are some of these playing Children of the Forest, and if so, which ones? The white ones or the black ones? And they would specify black actor. And I think one of the reasons they were having casting problems is it was difficult for them to find black people willing to play such a demeaning role. But that's just a theory. That might not be anything. But I don't know what casting problems means, but it might be unrelated. Just, I heard this report. Someone told me this in a leak, July 2018. Point 1, they started casting only white people and black people, no other races, so why do people think this is an ET? And then when I actually looked at all the casting sheets, point 2, there was no one who was blank because it's under prosthetics. It was all specifying the race, because we'll see them as humans who later get magically cursed. Martin never wanted to set a prequel story during the Long Night. He wrote no big stories then, And this was the last prequel pitched out of the 5. Then HBO usurped the other ones. We don't need stuff on the Targaryen conquest and the Dance of the Dragons. We can make up our own prequel by Richard Plepler. Richard Plepler and his lackey Casey Bloys picked this over the other pitches. I want you to remember that. These are the same men who greenlit the Confederate show with no pilot, based on a pitch meeting with David Benioff. And they did it for brand name recognition. They picked it over the real prequels because they wanted main characters named Stark and Lannister. In the other stories like Dance of the Dragons, they're prominent secondary characters, but not the main ones. So they just slapped one together, which would, in a contrived way, have Lannisters and Starks interacting 8,000 years ago. And they picked this, and for White Walker name recognition, because of all the hype about that back then, with no thought to the inherent lack of racial diversity in prehistoric Westeros. Cash in on that massive hype. People are spending like $600 on a bust of the Night King riding Viserion. The massive hype in early 2018 over the White Walkers. Remember just how big that was. So they went with the most shallow of name recognitions. Stark, Lannister, White Walkers, with no thought to, there's no story then, there's no black people we could easily put in, though you actually could have put Summer Islanders in it. And they solved this by just going, shove them in as elves or something, belatedly as a patch, after they'd already chosen it short-sightedly. But sir, our elves, I mean, children of the forest, we don't have elves, they don't look like humans. Just cast them as black humans first. Then say a magic curse or something turned all the black people into gremlin guys or whatever. This was the last prequel made out of 5 pitches. It's what HBO wanted. Because HBO's CEO, Richard Plepler, aka the man who hired David Friedman and even greenlit his Confederate show, wanted to cash in on the White Walker hype. He picked this over the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen prequel. He picked this over the Doom of Valyria prequel, which actually has great diversity in it. The Empire of Ash, where we would have seen Sothorios, which is their version of Fantasy Africa, in which Summer Islanders are main characters. But I guess Empire of Ash was too woke and too SJW. So now you are going to get cursed black people elves. Long Night was never the diversity prequel. Empire of Ash was. Long Night usurped it. And also, just because everyone was praising, it's going to be so diverse. It has a female showrunner, Jane Goldman, and while that's well and good that the main show, it was a 30-year low for an Emmy-level show to go 5 years without a female writer of any kind, I would see news sites just blind faith that not just diversity in terms of female representation, but you've seen news sites saying, wow, Jane Goldman, a woman, is in charge. There's going to be racial diversity. There's different kinds of diversity. Just because a white woman was showrunner was no guarantee it was a paragon of diversity. Just because a white woman is in charge doesn't mean it's going to have a lot of good roles for black women or black men. And the other stuff with Empire of Ash is they stressed half the writing staff isn't white, half the main characters aren't white. All this other stuff that, no, we went with Long Night. I want you to remember, really think of the people who were telling you how great Long Night would be and whether you should keep trusting them. I am calling them out specifically, Entertainment Weekly, Watchers on the Wall. That I remember because Watchers on the Wall runs that Con of Thrones convention, which a lot of you have probably heard of Ideas of Ice and Fire, big channel, over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. He just made a video explaining how he had an awful experience at Con of Thrones, that despite being a major YouTuber and he's black, there's video of this online, that the Con of Thrones panel on the prequels, please watch it. It's run by Watchers on the Wall. And the Watchers on the Wall panelists talk over everyone else. They never call on Ideas of Ice and Fire, on Quinn. And you know, even when they were talking, and they were just blindly talking about, there's going to be Yeetie in it, it's going to be so diverse. And I want you to watch that video, it's online. And in Quinn's video, he was saying about 2 months ago, I was at this awful convention, they didn't like him because he was willing to criticize Benioff and Weiss and the main TV show, that at Watchers on the Wall, they will throw you out for criticizing things because they like getting celebrity interviews. It's not even about liking the show, it's about a celebrity cult. That just watching this panel video, like people that run Watchers on the Wall, like Luca Nieto and these other people, they would talk over him, not let him get a word in edgewise. Even when the question came up about racial diversity in the Long Night prequel, they would talk over him when he tried to raise legitimate questions of, I'm nervous that we don't have confirmation on if they're who these black actors are playing. Because I told Quinn in private, I actually told Ideas of Ice and Fire about all of this. They're playing Children of the Forest. I told him this almost a year ago. That he politely said, wow, if this is true, F them, but you don't have proof. And I admittedly don't have proof. I'm told him what I'm telling you now. I can't prove this. I can only relay to you what my source told me, and we should check and be nervous about what if casting reports come out that start to reflect this, and they sort of did. But he wasn't all on board. He was reasonable about this. He went, wow, this is pretty terrible if true, but this sounds so unbelievable. But again, these are the guys that tried to make that Confederate thing happen, so what is believable anymore? But so he went to that convention knowing that there were some disturbing rumors, unproven, about race in the show, was trying to bring up, well, we don't know who these people are playing, and they just talked over him. He said in his video he just posted last week that he is not going to that convention again. He does not support Con of Thrones or Watchers on the Wall. They're out for themselves. They are promoting blind hype about Benioff and Weiss. And in the past week, look where that got them. They were throwing off Star Wars. They're not the next J.J. Abrams who's going to be a media empire. They are turning into pariahs. And mainstream news after that debacle at the Austin Film Festival is starting to realize what happens. One hell of a week. The Austin thing, I saw N.K. Jemisin, the Hugo-winning black female author, sci-fi author, complaining about that very strongly over Twitter just today. That it's really bringing up just how much of a failure this was due to nepotism and old boys networks behind the scenes. And Long Night Prequel was their last gasp. This is the thing Plepler picked over any potential Martin-based prequel. And you were going to get cursed black people elves, is what I was told. And these might be the creative differences that they were yelling about, that they mentioned that there were problems, and no one really wanted to talk about what is this like. And, I can't prove any of this. I was told this, ask, who were these black actors supposed to play? And I really hope news leaks out about what exactly were they trying to do in this in coming weeks. It's over now. We don't have to pretend to kiss your ass, and I really hope you remember the specific news sites like Entertainment Weekly's James Hibbard and Watchers on the Wall who were telling you to love this because it wasn't based on the books, and whether they are still a reliable news source, or if for a new show we should start over. I'm relying on Westeros.org and the nice winteriscoming.net site that I really hope that's the end of them, because they doubled down and doubled down hard on blind loyalty to HBO under the old regime, which is now being swept away because the lies are coming out. I look forward to better stuff with House of the Dragon. I'm going to make a separate video on that. And like I said, this might open up a slot for a Valyria prequel, because AT&T said we are willing to do 2. So please spread this video, and I can't prove it, but I hope it gets in the news, that if news sites can start reporting on this leak I have about this is what they were doing with black people, hopefully one of the cast members might come or a crewman might come forward and confirm, yes, this is what they were doing. that this is the day where we start turning it around, where we come back from the brink and we smash those Terminators into junk. I'm mixing up my genres. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the other. I'm joking. Just, this is when we start turning it around and taking back everything we've lost. Benioff and Weiss, Richard Plepler, the morons, the crazy people making Long Night, they don't plan, they don't build, they are frauds who are taking advantage of the rest of us. We are going through a dark time now, but we will rebuild because we believe in things, and we're not parasites like David Benioff, that we build things and believe in each other. And I hope we can build a better world together after these mistakes. And these will be the kind of nightmare stories that we tell our children 30 years from now, of these are the problems we had to face. Just when you see old interviews with Stan Lee and other older members of the sci-fi community saying these are problems we had to deal with in the 70s that are now the stuff of legend, of just fighting with idiot studios that did not, and the inherent racism and a lot of these will be the scary stories we scare our children with 20 years from now. This was crazy stuff we had to put up with in a very dark time, but we fought to make it a better place and live up to our ideals.